JavaScript's an amazing language because it can be used for app script, ad scripts, back-end server development, front-end development, so sort of animations and things like that. You name it. So learning it is really useful. But if you're looking at just writing app scripts and Google Ad scripts, a lot of the introductions you'll see online are full of browser-based stuff and node-based stuff, which you just don't need. So I'm focusing this on purely people that are going to be writing Google Ad scripts and app scripts. And I'm also weaving in the fact that you're probably going to be working with AI, ChatGPT for it to write code. What I would say about this is a big warning, like nobody's going to watch this starting from scratch or really early in their sort of coding life and remember it all or sort of understand it all. It's just not going to happen. So if you watch these and it's just so incredibly confusing, then I don't know, I would just note that it's kind of going to be, or at least for the vast majority of people. If you're an absolute genius, then, you know, good for you. You'll be fine. But for the rest of us, just try and take it slowly. Vary the different sort of sources of information. Talk to ChatGPT. Have a play around yourself. And obviously write in whatever app script or Google Ad scripts that you're working with and just sort of preview, look at the errors. And the main thing I would say is to try and get hands-on as soon as possible. So you might even want to pause this at each section just to sort of have a play and sort of see it working for yourself. In terms of actually running this code, I'm using Node, which you can download. And once that's installed, you can do node -- watch and then the name of the file, and then it will run. You can also just run this in something like AppScript, which hopefully you know to set up. I've explained that in some other videos. Let's start with a bit of a preamble. If you want to write a comment, you just do 2 forward slashes and then whatever your comment is. You can also do a multi-line comment just like this. You'll often see these at like the top of the script, and it's usually a good idea to write lots of comments and ask your AI to write comments as well, especially like above functions and things. And then in terms of how this broadly works before we get into the specifics is the code will essentially, it will run in order. So this will run, by run I mean like this will get saved to memory is what really happens. So this will run, so this sort of gets stored, and then this will run. And then here's an interesting point. Functions, wherever they are in your script, will get hoisted to the top. So you can think of any functions as before anything really runs. What JavaScript will do is it will sort of cut any functions and put it above everything. So you can imagine that this has run, so this has been stored and this function exists, and then everything else runs. And that's why, despite the fact that I call the function before it's even been defined, it still works. I still print out the message. Whereas if I was to say console.log I run first, then that's going to give me an error because I haven't defined that yet. But that's it. I just wanted to give you a quick preamble and then let's talk about variables. Now you can think of a variable as a shoebox that can only store one thing. Now that one thing can be tiny or it can be huge. It's like a wizard sleeve or the TARDIS. So the way we create variables is we'll say let, and then you're going to give it a name, so like account cost, and then you'll say equals, that's our assignment operator, and we're going to assign it 100, for example. And then I'm just going to log that out like so and save, and you can see that it's stored 100 in this variable name, and then we log it out. So with your variables, I really recommend giving them descriptive long names if you need to. There's certain rules like they can't start with a number, but otherwise you're generally fine. And it's generally considered best practice to use camel case. So lowercase, and then each following word is starting with uppercase. What you can also do is change variables. So you can say account cost equals account cost times 10. And now we're at 1,000. I say you can change variables, you can unless you define them with const. So if you did const account name, because that's not really going to change, and then I try and change that, then that's not going to work. As a beginner, I would just know that if you use const, you can't change it. That's all you really need to know when you might get an error. But I probably wouldn't use them, and I probably wouldn't worry about it. It's something for further down the line. And also note that you might see var, and it's kind of the same thing. I generally would recommend using let, but if you use var, it's not the end of the world. It's just really old at this point. In terms of specifically how this works, when you say, and I'm going to go back to let, account cost equals 100, what it's actually doing is storing the name of the variable and the contents in memory on your machine. That's not to be confused with it being stored on your hard drive. So as soon as this is completed running, none of this is being stored anywhere. But while it runs, so this line will initially run, and then it will sort of skip this, then it will get here. At this point, if we were to stop, this would be stored in memory, and then it's available throughout the script. And obviously you generally have lots of different variables with lots of different names, but that's the long and short of it. When you're working with AI, you might just have to tell it to use descriptive names, and in my experience it isn't too good at that, and this is really important. These names, you're going to come back to it whether it's tomorrow or in 6 months or a year, and it's so much easier if everything's named appropriately. And obviously, even if you're giving something a really long name, like it's got the name of the account, everything, these days in an IDE like this, which I recommend using, you start typing and it's filling it in for you. And often, you know, if you're using something with built-in AI like this does, Cursor's got it, even though I've turned it off right now, again, it's just going to auto-complete and write a lot of it for you. So there's no excuse not to have really descriptive variable names. Now I've separated arrays from variables, but an array is still a variable. As you can see, we're using the same variable keyword, you're giving it a name, using the assignment operator. The difference is it's in square brackets. And what we're doing is we're creating a list of items instead of a single item. So instead of a shoebox, it's more of a filing cabinet, except it's got infinite drawers, and each one of those drawers can contain infinite things. Maybe a stack of shoeboxes makes more sense. I'm not sure. But the reason these exist is, as you can imagine, if you've got lots of search terms and each one of those is an individual variable, it becomes a royal pain in the arse to manage all of that. So this is a way of grouping similar collections of strings, numbers, things like that. And you're going to work with these a lot. So in a minute, we'll talk about loops, and these are what you loop through. So as you can imagine, you might want to loop through these. And then for each search term, you want to check if it's relevant and then report on the ones that aren't relevant, and then maybe they get added as a negative keyword. So to look at what's actually inside an array and sort of work with them, you can say search terms, and then to look at index 0, you just do square brackets again and 0. And that's going to pull out the first item. And if you're new to this, that might be a little bit confusing that the first item is 0, but that's just something to remember. It goes 0, 1, 2. So if I assign this to a different variable, I'm going to say let first search term equals search term 0, and then let's log that. As you can see, it pulls out dog toys. You can also, of course, console.log the entire thing to look at everything too. What you can also do is update your arrays. So if I go again, search terms 0 equals dog collars, then it's changed it to dog collars, and then we've still got pet toys and cat toys. What you can also do is look at or use the properties and methods on your array, and they're really, really powerful. So if I go search terms and do dot, it's going to give us a list. If you're using AppScript, this should work too. But again, it's a good example where an editor really comes in handy because you can sort of scroll down and see what's available. So an example of a property is length. So a property is just a variable that's stored inside of our array or inside of whatever it is. So everything has properties, just like useful bits of information. So in this instance, our array has a length, which is 1, 2, 3. So if I do a console.log, then it's going to say we've got 3. And that's obviously really useful as you're sort of looping and things like that. It's also got methods. So again, I'm going to do search terms dot, and you can see all these little purple boxes are methods. Now methods is the same as a function. It's just you call it a method when it's attached to something. I don't know who decided that or why, but there it is. Now a popular method, for example, is push. So I can say push, and then what push will do is it will push a new element on the end of the array. So I can say push, someone searched for Bob toys for some reason, and so now if I bring this down, and I'm just going to delete this, then it's going to log 1, 2, 3, and then the fourth as well, Bob toys. It's worth having a bit of a play with what else arrays can do, and you're going to need to learn about removing things from arrays. I've mentioned updating things, adding things to the end, adding things to the beginning, but that's the sort of thing that you can sort of just ask ChatGPT these days, or ask AI, I just want to remove this element, and it's going to give you the code. So arguably these days, as you're learning this stuff, you don't actually need to remember all of that syntax. So I'm not going to go into it. What we are going to go into next is loops. Loops are another good example where you can kind of sort of ask and you'll get back your loop. But again, it's going to help to understand the language around it so you can see what it's doing. So there's two types of loops you're going to work with 99% of the time. The first is a for loop. And the way a for loop works is you can say for, and then you define a variable in our brackets. Let's say search term index in, and then search terms. So it's going to say for the search term index, which is going to be 0, 1, and 2 in the search term. And this is a loop. So this is going to be defined as 0, and then it's going to loop round, and then it's going to be 2, and then it's going to be 3. So if I console.log our search term index, you're going to see exactly that, 0, 1, 2. And if you want the search term, you'll remember earlier I told you you can do search term and then whatever the index. So if I do 0, we will get, let me actually log this. That might help. Console.log. Then we're going to get dog toys 3 times. But if instead I pass in this index, which is going to be 0, 1, and 2, then you get a different value each time. Now, what you'll often see people doing is they'll like let I in whatever. Obviously, if you want to do that, that's fine, and often you'll get that back. Personally, I don't like it, and I always tell ChatGPT to not do that, because as code starts to get complicated, you forget what I actually means. It's usually relevant to something that you're doing, and then you might have another loop, and maybe you use I again, and it just gets a bit messy. I much prefer to like give it a decent name like that. Now, what you can also do is say for search term, I'm going to delete index, of search terms, and then instead of having to do the index thing, you just log the search term, and then that's going to work. Which one you use depends if you need the index or not. You don't always need the index. The other type of loop is a while loop. And the way that works is you can say while, and then as long as whatever's in the brackets is true, it will keep going forever. So if I type true, open this up, and I'm going to say console.log I am true. Now if I click save, this is just going to run forever, and it might crash my computer. You know what? I'm going to go for it because I'm feeling absolutely crazy. And look, that's just going forever. My computer might die. I might have to do a new video. But if I just cancel that out, I've ended Node, which is what's running this. And generally, this is something you want to avoid because it might crash your computer or whatever. But you know what? I also think this is a rite of passage to create an infinite loop. So give it a go and just see what happens. So what you want to do is instead, though, when you're actually making things, is instead of doing an infinite loop, you want to get out of it. And the way you do that, or one way to do that, is you type break. So break will do exactly that. If I run this again, save, it will print once, and then it's going to stop because I've said I want to break. And usually you'll break based on some sort of condition. So you might say if, and I'm going to do search terms dot length is more than, I'll say less than, I don't know, our row number, then we'll break. And I'll talk about all of this in a second, I promise. And then up here, we're going to say let row number equals 0. And then down here, I'm going to say row number plus plus, which is going to take row number and it's going to be 1, then 2, then 3. And eventually, our search term length, I've completely cocked this up because this needs to be in brackets. Eventually, our search term length will be less than our row number. So as you can see, it says I'm true 5 times, and then it breaks. So let me just explain what's happening here. The row number is 0. It logs I am true, and then it says, is the search term length, which by the way is 3, is 3 less than 0? Nope. So we don't break, we continue down here and we increase the row number. Now the row number is 1. We log again. Is 3 less than 1? No. So nothing. So this doesn't happen. We log again and then we keep going. But then eventually the row number is 4, which is why we log 5 times, because it starts at 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is 5 in total. And then we hit break, which stops the entire loop. Now what you see a lot in Google Ad scripts is something more like this. So you might have rows, and this is the iterator. And this will come back, so you'll often do something like adsapp.report, and then you'll pass in a query, and then you'll get some rows back. I'm not going to go into that right now, but let's just imagine that you've got your rows. And then the way that works is you'll say while rows.has next. So you're saying while it has next, so while that's true, we'll enter the loop. And then you'll say let row, so we'll define our row, and it equals to rows dot next. So our row is whatever's next in this iterator. So this iterator is going to look a little bit like this. So does it have next? And we'll sort of start at 0 here. Yes, it has dog toys. Now our row dog toys is equal to rows.next. So this is the first one. And then it's going to loop round again, and it's going to be like, does it still have a next? And it's like, yep, it's got pet toys. So we're going to grab that and assign it to row. And then does it still have a next? Yes, it's got cat toys. In reality, the row contains a lot more information. It's not just going to be a string like this. It's going to have your, let's say you've got a campaign performance report, something like that. So it's going to have like clicks and cost in your campaign name, things like that. So then you'll have like row and then, I don't know, metrics.clicks. Now, all of this is a great example of something which I'm not expecting you to really take in because it's far too much information. But again, it's hopefully just a bit of an intro to how this sort of thing is working. But the important thing you need to know, if you see one of these loops, if you see while and you see sort of rows.has next, you'll know you're in a loop. And if you ever see break, you know it's going to stop within that loop. The other thing you need to know about loops, let me go back to a really basic one. So it logs the search terms because it's true, and then it breaks. So it only does it once, right? What you can also do is continue. So continue will skip the rest of the code. So it's going to hit continue. It's going to skip all of this, and then it's go back to the beginning. So this actually is another infinite loop. So if I'm about to continue like that, then it's just an infinite loop if I'm about to continue. which again I'll cancel out of, because it prints this, it continues, which means all of this gets skipped. And again, similar to break, continue will often be wrapped in some conditional logic. So we'll say, is this search term valid? No, then continue, because we're not interested in running the rest of the logic. That's quite a lot for loops, and I've talked about conditionals and things like that. That might be a little bit confusing right now. In fact, it almost certainly is. But let me move on, and we'll talk about conditionals, which hopefully will help a little bit. Okay, let's talk about conditionals. So let's say we've got the search term dog toys, and we're saying the search term must include the word dog. And this is part of our logic to find negative keywords. So this is good. This is a good search term because that's what our company does. We sell dog toys, and exclusively the best dog toys in Britain. So we're going to say if, open brackets, our search term dot includes, which is a handy method, and then search term must include, then console.log adding dog toys as negative, and we can even put some little quotes either side. And yeah, this is something I didn't mention earlier. You can concatenate strings like this. You take a string and you just add another string to it, and it'll create a nice long string for you. So let me just go through this. We start with if, and then you open your brackets, and then this needs to be true. If this is true, then we say add as negative. In fact, I've done this wrong, haven't I? We'll say do not add. That's right. So if this is true, it must include it, and it does include it. So we'll actually do not add it as a negative keyword. We're good. Okay. Now let's imagine I change this to cat. Then we're not saying do not add it. So let's log that out. If we want to log that, what you can also do is else. So we'll go else, and else doesn't need anything in brackets, because what we're saying is anything that doesn't match this. So if this isn't true, then we're going to come down here and say console.log again, and this time it is add search term as negative. So actually, yes, we'll add cat toys as negative. Now this is kind of a Boolean true or false thing. We're either going to add it as a negative or we're not. So you only really need if else. But what you can also do is else if, and then in your brackets you can put in some secondary logic, and then end on an else. So maybe what we'll do instead, we'll say if the search term is none. So I'm going to say exclamation point, which means not. We're saying if not search term, then console.log invalid search term. Okay. So let's imagine this, instead of being cat toys, is null. And as you can see, it's invalid search term. And this is actually some interesting syntax you'll see. So whatever's in here, as I mentioned, is going to be true or false. But what also happens within your if statement, it will try and convert whatever's in your brackets here to a Boolean. So it will take this, for example, and be like, it's null. It's going to say, okay, I'm just going to say that that's false. And so if that's false, then search term is false. But we're saying not false, which is true. And if this is true, then we'll log invalid search term. Otherwise, we'll go into the checks. Okay. So at the moment it's null, and it's the same if it's 0. 0 is an invalid search term. If it was a different number, it actually wouldn't be invalid, and it'll end up checking it and we'll get an error. But any sort of string that isn't empty, it will check. So again, empty, that's going to be false, invalid search term. But if we go back to dog toys, then search term is true because this is valid. So in other words, this would be false. Not true is false. So that wouldn't run. And then it's going to say, okay, does the search term include whatever it must include, which is dog? Well, actually, yes. So it's going to say do not add. And again, just to really send this home, if I change this to cat toys, first of all, yeah, we're saying, is it valid? Yeah. Does it include dog? Nope. So this won't run. But then otherwise, none of these two were true, so it's just going to run this. Add the search term as a negative. Now, before I move on from conditionals, I wanted to mention switch statements. They work the same as if statements, except, in my opinion, I would avoid them entirely. If you're starting out, you don't need to look at these. And even for me, after programming for 15 plus years, I just don't like switch statements. I don't think they read well. I think this is far too confusing, and it's always easier to use an if statement. So if you ever ask ChatGPT for something and it gives you a switch statement, I would just say convert it to an if, or maybe just add that as a prompt. So I've created a custom GPT, and that's an example of one of the instructions. I'd be like, just don't use switch, just use if. But I wanted to mention it, so if you see it, you know that this is just a different type of conditional. So we spoke about arrays earlier. That's an ordered list of items. Generally, you can do quite a simple loop and do something with them, but they can be quite limited. And what an object lets you do is form collections of data and sort of form relationships between them. And you do that via key value pairs. So again, going back to our dog toys shop, we've got our search terms on the left, and then we've got whether or not we'll add them as a negative on the right, so our result. And our key, for example, is cat toys. So our key is the search term, and our value is the result, which is why I've called it search term results. And to look at the values, to grab the value, you're just going to say the name of the variable, and then again in square brackets, just like with arrays, and then you want to add the key. So if I paste in the key, it's going to, what we're saying is, this is our key, our sort of identifier, get me the value within search term results, and that is that we're going to add it as a negative keyword. What you can also do is things like looking at the keys. So if you wrap this in brackets, you can say object.keys, and it's going to give you cat toys, dog toys, bird toys as an array. You can also say object.values. So you can really easily turn the keys or the values into an array and work with it like that. But this, where you sort of grabbing the overall object and passing in the key, is generally how you'd work with it. Now, the real beauty of objects comes in the way that you can organize your data and give it labels. So instead of using an index like you might with an array, you can name each piece of data in the way you would a variable, but you still get that flexibility and ability to use loops and things like that. So let me just delete these two to make it dead simple. Right now, we know that this is a search term and this is our result, but it can be difficult to really know what that means. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, again, the search term itself can be the key. So I'm going to say this is our key, colon, and then I'm going to open it up to another object, and I'm going to define that with some curly braces. So cat toys is equal to, which is essentially what the colon means, and then it's equal to another object. And this is an object in the same way that this entire thing is an object, so it needs key value pairs. So I'm just going to bring this up, and what we're going to say is our key now is search term, and that is equal to colon cat toys, and then we need a comma because this is sort of a list within our objects. It's a list of key value pairs. So the search term is cat toys, and the result colon is add cat toys as a negative. So now you can hopefully see how this is starting to be really organized. So we have our search term cat toys, which is just a useful ID or key, and that is equal to all of this. So we're saying this is our search term, this is our result, and as you can imagine, this might be full of loads of information related to the search term, the ad group, the campaign, the keyword, things like that. And so now down here, when we log cat toys, it's logging this entire object, search term cat toys result this. And so when we start to work with this, we might say let search term equals search term results and then the key, which again is just going to give us the search term and the result. And then later on, it sort of makes sense to be like, okay, the search term dot result, which is now going to give us add cat toys as negative. And it's kind of more of a human language to be like, get me the search term dot result, get me the result within the search term, is what that means. And again, it's just better than using 0 or 8 or whatever the index might be with an array. This stuff, I would say, I'm trying to think back to when I was learning this stuff again, and it's pretty complicated. Especially as you start to loop through things, it can be difficult to sort of wrap your head around like exactly what things are doing. And all I can advise is to use lots of logs and also start to learn how these work within a loop. And in fact, let's have a quick look at a loop. Looping through objects is similar to looping through arrays in that we can say for let, so we create our variable, but instead of the index, this variable will equal the key. So let's say search term, because obviously the key is the search term, in search term results, and then we can console.log a search term, and it's going to give us each one. What you can also do is, if you want the result, it's what I showed you earlier. So it's the search term in square brackets after the actual name of the variable. So search term results, get me whatever corresponds to this key. So the first key is going to be cat toys. Get me what corresponds to that in search term results, which is add cat toys as negative. So you save that, and then you get each individual result. Let's talk about functions. This is last, but it's really not least, and this sort of language is really important to understand. Often you're going to say to ChatGPT, write me a function that grabs all of the search terms from a certain campaign. So let's go back to our conditional logic. We've got the search term. We want it to include dog, or good, or negate, and for this we're going to negate it, okay? Now as you start to write logic like this throughout your script, it'll start to get really messy. And as you start to apply this same logic in different areas, you end up repeating yourself a lot. And they're the two main things that functions are used for. They prevent you from repeating yourself, and they keep everything nice and tidy. So the way you create a function is you're going to go function, believe it or not, space, and then it's the name of the function, which you want to be nice and descriptive. So should be added as negative. And then we're going to pass in the search term and whatever the search term must include. So these are called arguments. When I say passing, you pass in arguments. And what we're saying is, these are the arguments that we want you to send in. Now these could be called anything. These could be called arg1 and arg2. And then within the function, you just reference these. And these are equal to whatever gets passed in. I'm going to leave them the same as what we've called our variables here, because that's just makes more sense. It's a lot easier to understand. And then you open up your curly brackets, just like you did with your if statement. And then this is where you add your logic. Now, a function can sort of do things standalone. It can do some work. So for example, a function might add a negative keyword. They can also return things. So if I say return hello like this, and then below it, I do console.log, and then I call the function like this, and it wants two arguments, 1, 2. So I'm just going to do 1, 2, like so, and it returns hello. So let's just go through this again. So we call should be added as negative. We pass in 1 and 2, and they will correspond to these two. Now in the function, we're not actually using them. We just say return hello, and so this comes back here and then it gets sent to console.log, and then that appears over here, hello. Instead of hello, let's actually pass in some search terms. Let's do something else. Let's say cat, bongs, and dog. So now, again, it's just hello because I haven't used it yet. But if I return the search term, then it's gonna cat bongs gets passed in as an argument, and then we return that search term into the log, which logs it out as cat bongs. I don't know why I went cat bongs. That's an unlikely search term, but you never know. Now, the beauty of this is the fact that you can, as I said, wrap logic. So a good example would be whether or not something's going to be added as a negative. So let me grab this, paste it in. And at the moment, we're console logging all good and negate, which I'll leave in. But what you really want to do is return true or false. So should be added as negative, all good. Well, we want to return false because we do not want to add it as a negative. Otherwise, we'll return true. And then later on, and in fact, let me delete these. So this is our decision maker. And then later on, we're just going to go if should be added as negative. Should what be added as negative? Our search term. And then what does it need to include? Search term must include. And then we'll just console.log. And there you go. Isn't that much easier to read? So later on, when you come to look at this code, or even as you're developing it, you'll create functions and you'll almost forget about them. All you need is the name. And you know by looking at that name that what we're doing is should be added as negative. And as the name stops applying to everything that a function is doing, it's generally a good sign that it's doing too much. You want your functions to do as little as possible. And that's something you want to ask ChatGPT to. Just keep your functions nice and small. There'll always be some functions that tie everything together that do lots of different things, but that might be only one or a couple depending on the size of the script and the sort of logic you're dealing with. But it will always boil down to like really small functions like this. And then isn't this much easier to read? If search terms should be added as negative, here's the search term, then we log, or in reality that's where we'd add it as a negative keyword. And we might repeat this logic loads of times in the script. This might be part of a really big loop, and instead of it also including all this information, we just say should be added as negative, which makes things a lot easier. There's loads more we can get into with functions, but the main thing you need to know is that sometimes they just do things on their own, sometimes they return things, they need to be named well. Generally, it's a good idea as well to add like a good comment above them. That's the sort of thing you can, again, ask ChatGPT to do. And it's something to get used to working with. And you know what's also a good example of a function is log. Whenever a function's on a class, as I might have mentioned, you call it a method, but it's the same thing. But this is also a function. And the way you call the function is these brackets. So the name of the function and then brackets, and that means you're calling it. Same here, brackets. Whenever you see brackets after a variable name, that means you're trying to call a function and run the code within that function. And you can optionally add arguments which reflect the logic within that function. This is a really quick rundown of functions, and in fact it's a really quick rundown of everything. So, as I think I've said, if you leave this and you're going, oh, this is all really confusing, it should be. This is really difficult. This is a bit of a primer. Now's the time to sort of go away and sort of try this stuff out. And in fact, if I were you, I'm sure I would have been pausing this, trying stuff, coming back, etc. Hopefully this has helped. And if you've got any questions or anything else you want me to cover, please leave a comment below and I'll do my best.